Welcome to Ask an Atheist. I'm Jayne, an attorney at FFRF.
And I am Andrew Seidel, a constitutional attorney, just like Ryan, and the director of strategic response here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And today, we're going to continue a broader discussion that we've been having about atheists running for public office.
A few weeks ago on this show, you may have seen Andrew and Liz Cavell chatted with Hemant Mehta, editor at The Friendly Atheist, about the stigma attached to atheists running for public and political office. Hemant explained that stigma seems to be lessening.
That's right, and you can actually see that episode of Ask an Atheist on FFRF's YouTube page. You can also watch the talk that Hemant gave at the FFRF convention on that same topic. Now, during the discussion, in which Hemant presented a lot of good, compelling evidence to make his case, we kind of continually came back to this one point. The stigma is lessening as more and more atheists run for office. More atheists run, less stigma on them all.
And that applies to atheists not just running for office, but outside of that context as well. Coming out of the closet is, as a non-believer, is one of the best things that you can do to combat this traditional stigma.
And today, we are going to talk to the most dangerous woman in Tennessee, someone who actually walked the walk. Gayle Jordan is an attorney, an Ironman athlete, an activist at Recovering from Religion, and she ran for state senate in Tennessee twice. And that's what we want to talk with her about today. Gayle, welcome to Ask an Atheist.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you.
So Gayle, you ran for Tennessee State Senate, District 14, in 2016, and then again in 2018. And you did that as an atheist. So let's first of all, let's start it off by watching your campaign video.
I love this.
Okay. I've been a Rutherford County resident most of my adult life. I raised my 4 children on the hard work and fresh air of farm life, and they're all Tennessee public school graduates. I was a stay-at-home mom until my kids began to leave for college, when I returned to my long-held dream of attending law school, and I became a lawyer in 2015. When I'm asked how I would govern, I have a simple 3-question test. Is it rational? Does this legislation solve an identified problem in the state of Tennessee? Is it reasonable? Does this legislation make the very best use of your tax dollars and mine? And is it right? Does this legislation do the most good for the largest number of people with the least negative impact for the fewest number of people? My vision for District 14 provides health care for the working folks who need it while saving our rural hospitals, compensating our teachers with higher wages and tangible benefits while eliminating unnecessary student testing, and addressing our opioid addiction problem by destigmatizing treatment, holding the pharmaceutical industry accountable, and legalizing cannabis. My name is Gayle, and I'm asking for your vote on March 13th in the special election for District 14.
Okay, so that was your campaign video, Gayle, and we can show that now because you're not currently running for office. FFRF, as everybody knows, we are a nonpartisan organization. We don't take sides in any political contest, but this is about what you did. That's not a current ad, correct?
That's correct, and it's quite radical, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, it's shocking stuff in there.
Healthcare, education.
Well, can you tell everybody a little bit, to start off, just kind of about why you decided to run?
Sure. I have often said that the two of the most important characteristics to have to run for office are a big mouth and a thick skin, and I have both. And there was a need I live in Tennessee, we have a Republican supermajority, very rural, religious, Republican district. I have my district was a 5-county district, and the Republican who held the office in 2016 had not even had a Democratic opponent in years. And so I felt compelled to do it. We have, as the video addressed, we have a terrible opioid addiction problem. We have our rural hospitals are closing because, of course, we didn't expand Medicaid. We had issues that were beginning to really affect my neighbors, the people that are in my neighborhood and the people that are in my district. And I felt like it was important to have a visible choice, to have a choice and have someone running on the things that really made a difference in our district.
So that makes a lot of sense to me that your campaign video kind of highlighted all the things you were just talking about, that these are the actual the things that are on the minds of the people in your district, right? So your atheism wasn't mentioned certainly, but I'm sure you knew that was going to come up, right, in that kind of rural religious district. So how did you handle that, running as an atheist in that environment? Were you planning on kind of avoiding it, or were you hitting it head on? What was your thought process on that?
Thank you for asking that question. I had been an out atheist for years, so there was no way to run for office. I had no intention of hiding from it, nor did I have the ability to hide from any of it. So that was never an option, but neither was I going to make it the center part of my campaign. I knew that the folks in my district would struggle with it. As a matter of fact, before I ran, I went to each of the county Democratic Party leadership, and I told my story. I told how I used to have a belief in some of those things that religious people believe in, that I had been brought up in that I was so devoted to it. I raised my children in the church, and that at some point in my life, I began to lose confidence in those beliefs. And so when I shared the story with the parties, I said, I want to run on the things that matter in our district, but you need to know this about me. And they were overwhelmingly supportive. None of them, they all knew that it was going to be something of an issue, but having told the initial story and explaining to them in a way that they could understand and accept and support me through, we didn't have, as we launched the campaign, we were prepared for it. We were ready for what we thought we were ready for it. We knew that our opponent might bring it up, but we didn't realize the extent to which they would go.
So they did bring it up too. I mean, they essentially attempted to weaponize your atheism against you. Do you want to tell us about maybe? I mean, let's talk about that one piece of direct mail first, or some of those pieces. I think we have an image of it that we can show while you're explaining to people what happened here.
Sure. As soon as that video was released, and as I said, that's as vanilla democratic principles video as you can get: healthcare, education, infrastructure, all the things that we so firmly believe in. And yet when it was released, the other side, both my opponent and his campaign and the Tennessee Republican Party, responded so strongly, as you see on your screen. They started with mailers, huge pictures of just my distorted face, things that I had said. They did a lot of research. I had been on podcasts through the years telling my story, and they tried to capture as many of those statements as they could. And those things are expensive, as you know. There were about 50,000 voting households in our district, and they just blanketed, and they were coming every day. I'm a resident of the district, so I would walk to my mailbox and brace myself for what horrible picture of my face, what horrible thing have I said that they're going to put on this flyer and blanket the district with.
Now, I think the worst one of those of the stories that you told was you married a couple of your friends, and they used that marriage. You posted about it on Facebook. It became an attack ad. Can you tell that story? Because that to me was just pretty shocking, even in this day and age.
Right. In the December prior to my special election in March of 2018, I had the privilege to marry these two gentlemen. They're dear friends of mine. And the flyer that you see, that's a flyer. They had taken an image that I had posted on my Facebook page, of course, after the ceremony and with their permission, in classic Gayle Jordan snark, because I have no other way of managing myself. I said, doing my part to destroy the fabric of America because of, it's funny because I'm funny, because it was such a joyful day, and these two men obviously are very devoted to one another, and what a joy to have brought them together and had the privilege of marrying them. My opponent took the image and put it on a flyer and used the language that I use: believe her when she says she's going to destroy the fabric of America. And that was bad. That was bad enough. But the rest of the story is both of these gentlemen are constituents of the district. One of these gentlemen is a United States Air Force veteran with combat-related PTSD. And so one March morning, he walked to his mailbox and pulled out the flyer with a picture of the happiest day of his life being mocked by the 50,000 people in the district. It was brutal. It was so intrusive. When I talk about my experience, I often say that both Shane and Landon have pursued legal action against the Tennessee Republican Party. That's as much as I'll say in the interest of protecting their privacy. And I always try to mention, thank you, Shane, for your service to our country.
Well, what a terrible thing, just generally, as a side note, that you're trying to win political points, win an election, but to just be thoughtless or just you don't care that, oh yeah, I'm taking this image that's the happiest day in someone's life and we're going to use it as a way to try to attack somebody else. I think that's despicable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gayle, can I also ask, it's striking to me that in a district that's, I would think your opponent shouldn't have had great alarm at being challenged. You said it's a rural, heavily Republican-leaning district. That they spent all this money and did all this campaigning against you. Do you think was that just because they were worried about is that par for the course and it's just this is a Democrat running against us, so we need to really ground her into dust? Or do you think part of it was that your atheism kind of rattled them? Are they so afraid of having an atheist in the Senate, or what do you think it is?
I think it was probably a combination of some of those things. When I ran in 2016, I ran against a 12-year incumbent who'd not had an opponent. They didn't pay any attention to me. There were no flyers. And I got the same 35% as every other Democrat in the state of Tennessee in the 2016 cycle. The 2018 was a special election. The fellow who had won the seat in 2016 took a position in the Trump administration in agriculture. That seat became an open seat. And as you know, in a special election, the time frame is quite compressed. And so your campaign strategy is a little bit different because you only have a 12-week period of time in which you can campaign. Additionally, you're the only election on the ballot. And so it was a unique set of circumstances. My opponent was a very wealthy pharmacist. And that comes with baggage in some of the rural areas. So between all of those things, and remember that the 2018 was after the world changed in 2016, and Democrats were waking up to the fact that democracy requires defending. So between all of those things, we think that we had a better chance than we had in 2018. We'd had a special election in a nearby district, and they had come close to winning. So all of those things together, we didn't have the funding to be able to do polling. But sometimes on the other side, you have people that share information with you. What I'm getting at is the other side did do polling, and we kept getting information that we were ahead, because what you're trying to do in a special election is not so much a persuasive campaign. With the circumstances, with my being an atheist, we didn't even attempt to do a persuasive campaign. What we were working on was what's known as a get out the vote campaign. Mm-hmm. And it was having an effect. And so as the election day got nearer and we had our early voting period of time, the information that we were getting back is that we were ahead. So not only had they prepared themselves with the flyers because they knew the circumstances that they were, all of those things that I said were in our favor. The other side was aware of that too. And then after early voting, when we got the information that we were ahead, that's when the other side took their most drastic step.
Now you got to tell us what that was.
Right. So as they found themselves in a predicament, I think they made a decision to engage in unethical and unconstitutional behavior. The campaign manager of the other side sent a letter to all of the churches in our district, and it started with, "Good afternoon, dear pastors and friends." It was very targeted to the pastors, and in fact, the campaign manager told his own bona fides. He's a pastor and he loves baby Jesus more than anybody, and his candidate loves baby Jesus as much as anybody, and the other side is an atheist running for office. And so in the paragraph, in the letter, it says, "So please tell your congregation to go out and vote in this special election. Remember that the biggest obstacle for a special election is getting out the vote, letting people know that there is this weird random Tuesday afternoon in March where we're going to have a special election." They blanketed the churches in the district, and in rural Tennessee, that's a lot of churches and a lot of pastors that they sent this letter to. And as I talk about this, I often say, and if you don't think that those pastors began to preach that message from the pulpit to tell their congregation that there was a special election and that there was an atheist running, then you don't know religion and you don't know Tennessee.
Well, and this is an issue that's very near and dear to FFRF. We've sued over this a number of times. For everybody watching who's familiar with it, we're talking about the Johnson Amendment right now. So this is the federal rule that says that nonprofits must be nonpartisan. It's why I gave that disclaimer at the top of this episode that FFRF is a nonpartisan organization. We're not endorsing or opposing anybody for public office. That is required for every tax-exempt organization in the country. If you want a tax exemption, you must be nonpartisan. And the reason for that is pretty basic. We want charitable donations to go to charitable work. We don't want it to go to political work. Now, if you listen to those pastors or maybe to your opponent's campaign manager, the argument that they will make is, well, hey, we have freedom of speech and religious freedom. And nobody's saying that they can't endorse a candidate. We're just saying that they can't do it as their nonprofit. So they can't do what you suggested, which is get up in the pulpit and say, vote for or against so-and-so, just as we can't get on this show and say, vote for or against so-and-so. Ryan and I are perfectly able to do that when we're sitting around our own dinner table or on our own personal social media feeds and stuff like that.
And pastors could even say on issues, they can help to get out the vote generally. They could get up there and say, hey, there's a special election. We encourage everybody to vote. And we encourage you to vote for someone who is going to uphold the values that are important to you, right? They could say that, but where it crosses a really clear line is where they're saying, this is a candidate who's an atheist. We want you to show up and make sure this person doesn't win.
Very blatant. And the sad part here is that the campaign, they're the ones who they had no restriction, or they felt no restriction on luring these pastors in to unconstitutional behavior.
Right.
They not all of most of our churches in our area are rural voters, and it's a rural area, and sometimes they're a little bit low information. And I'll be quite frank with you, a lot of these pastors probably don't have a comprehensive understanding. They didn't set out to engage in unconstitutional behavior. My opponent, however, is a politician at the state level. He and his campaign should have had a huge understanding of what kind of behavior that was going to elicit. And so I think it says a little bit of something about their character that the campaign would have enticed these pastors to give this message from the pulpit.
No, I think that's an excellent point. They're sophisticated enough to know what the rules are, and they are, I think the word enticing is a great one. They're enticing people who may not know what the rules are to violate the law, to break the law.
Yeah.
Now, one of the pastors that did it was not local. It was kind of a big name in pastoring, if that's a thing. Do you want to tell us about that a little bit?
Oh, sure. As the campaign began to build in momentum, we kept getting surprised by all of the attention that was brought to us. It's in the topic of today's conversation, which is atheists running for office. And so I got retweeted and commented on by dear brother Franklin Graham, who had an opinion on whether or not I should run for office. And as I said, I had not intended on making my atheism part of my campaign. It was going to come up. Honestly, Andrew and Ryan, if I had to do it all over again, I might would have campaigned harder on it, because, as you heard in my campaign video, what compels me to do good is the well-being of my neighbors, is their genuine suffering and their genuine well-being. And so as Franklin Graham came after me and said that my being an atheist, whatever it was he said, really and truly, my atheism is what informs my morality. It is what compels me to do good, whether that's running for office or contributing to local good deeds or trying to make my local library a better place, or whatever it is I do. It's because I hold a belief that this is our one fabulous, awesome, wonderful, true life. And making my community better makes my life better. I mean, it is a little not as altruistic as it might sound. I know what it feels like to thrive, and I know what it feels like to suffer. And that compassion and that empathy drives me to do good. So if I had to do it all over again, and my advice for folks is not to be hesitant and not to be afraid to run on the values that we hold. This is the truest American value, is that we want to make our country and our communities better places.
That's beautifully put. It's a beautiful sentiment as well. And I think that kind of goes to the heart of one of the, well, to me, let me rephrase that. I think it's striking that your empathy that derives from your shared humanity is so threatening and scary to the other side. And I want to back up to the beginning. You know, we call this, what you used the title for your talk, The Most Dangerous Woman in Tennessee. And we did that because that was a label given to you by the lieutenant governor, right? And Bruce, do you have that tweet? I think we have that tweet. It was the first one we were going to show. So there it is, Randy McNally. Tell us about that, Gayle.
There it is. Of course, as soon as we released our campaign video, and you keep in mind that we had about a 12-week time period, so things happened quickly. So we got our campaign video prepared, and when it launched, and we saw it at the beginning of the broadcast, it was pretty straightforward. And yet, when it released, these folks just responded so viciously. And this is a state Senate seat. This is the lieutenant governor of the state of Tennessee, and he's talking about a fellow Tennessee citizen, that he would say that I'm the most dangerous woman, and this kind of reaction, and the Tennessee GOP's reaction, and my opposing candidate's campaign's reaction. It is, I think it's telling that they react so quickly when it's, I do think it's important for us to have visibility as non-believers, as atheists, whatever language we use to identify ourselves, to help the shock value of this kind of thing. I often say when I give this talk, never again will Tennessee be able to say, oh, we've never had an atheist run for state office. Well, you have, and we're done with that now. And so maybe the next time the lieutenant governor won't feel compelled to call that person the most dangerous woman in Tennessee, or man, or whatever, because they're getting over themselves. Guess what? There are atheists even in rural Tennessee.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and especially if you are getting in front of what your secularism means and saying, this means that I have an interest in making life better in the real world for the people around me. And, you know, the sort of neighborly empathy that you're expressing, it becomes absurd for them to say, this is the most dangerous idea I've ever seen. I think people more and more are going to look at that and say, you've got to be kidding me. So that makes sense to me that you would run harder on that, to the extent that you're getting out in front of that argument. Do you have any other advice that you would give to anyone who might be listening who is non-religious and is thinking of possibly running for office?
Sure. I think one of the first things that we need to do, we as a secular community need to do, is get over this binary approach to these seats. Yes, we absolutely needed the seats, especially here in Tennessee. And yes, we were. It was a loss that we didn't get the seat. But as I give this talk around different areas, I try to bring up the positive takeaways. And one of the positive takeaways is that at that March 2018 election, thousands of religious Democrats voted for an out and visible atheist. So there's that. That matters. That matters for the next person who runs. That matters for the national and the local conversation of atheists running for office. And the other positive thing that was a huge takeaway for me, in a particularly religious area like I am here in Tennessee, and you're an atheist, obviously we've been talking about people's visceral response to it, religious people's visceral response. We don't ever get the opportunity to defend ourselves and go, hold the phone, we're not sacrificing babies, we're not, worshiping Satan, and we don't ever get the chance to defend ourselves. They identify us as an atheist, and that's the end of the story. Running for office, everywhere I went, because the Tennessee GOP decided to make a big issue out of this, every podcast, every television interview, every newspaper article, every appearance, I got to explain what it means to be an atheist. I got to explain what I do believe in. I got to explain how I arrived at my conclusion. I got to defend myself. And when do you ever have that opportunity? So my encouragement to folks, to folks who, whatever word they use to identify themselves, but you're going against the grain, whether you're in a highly religious area or not, is it will give you the opportunity to define who you are and what you believe, because running for office does put a spotlight on you. I often say running for office was open to me because that was what the area of need was. If the area of need had been for me to help with a campaign or to do door knocking or to any number of things, then that's where I think we need to plug in. but we don't discount the fact that you may be the point person, you may be the face, you may be, it may be a good opportunity for you to run for office, and recognize it for the privilege and joy that it was, and the opportunity to get to say, this is who I am and this is what I believe.
I love that. And I think your first point, too, that we should stop looking at elections as binary is really important. I was actually interviewing Trey Crowder for FFRF's TV show, Free Thought Matters. He is the liberal redneck, the comedian. Maybe people are familiar with him. If not, look him up. He's hilarious.
Also from Tennessee.
Also from Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And he made the point that, he's one of the things he's trying to do is to tear down the stigma that's attached to people with a Southern accent. And he's, look, a third of Southerners are going to vote liberal in every single election. That means there's a massive chunk of the American South that is liberal and progressive and that cares about these issues. And when we treat the South as this monolith, that's conservative and religious, we're doing a disservice to everybody down there who's running for office. And like you said, I meant to look up the numbers, but thousands of people in Tennessee voted for an atheist for public office. I mean, that is amazing, and that should encourage everybody to go out there and run for office. Now, I want to follow up with one more question. When we discussed running with Hemant, he hypothesized that addressing atheism early on, but focusing on issues seemed to be the recipe for success. So, in other words, saying, yep, I'm an atheist now, let me tell you my plan to fix the roads in our community. Now, what you were just saying seems to be slightly opposed that your empathy and your values derive from your atheism and your secularism and your humanism, and you wanted to talk about that. I also think part of it was that your opponents made your atheism a larger issue, so I'm not sure you had the option to do that. Can you talk a little bit about that again? I know you said you would run on it a little bit harder. Do you think Hemant's take that it's easier to just say, I'm an atheist, and then switch to the issues is worthwhile, or would you double down on yours?
Oh my goodness, that one's a wide open question. I would have to put my trust in the person who's running in your district. The first piece of advice I would say is to get to know your district. If you have the privilege, as Hemant said, of being able to state it and move on, like you would in a less conservative district, you might be able to get away with that. Boom, I'm an atheist, here's what my plan is. Those of us who are in some of the districts where it's a little bit bigger deal, we may have to spend a little bit more time on it. So my my answer to that, Andrew, is kind of a weak hybrid of whatever it is you feel like your district is going to need. Well, whoever you are as a person, if you feel comfortable with what your beliefs are and where you've gotten, have at it. Tell them about it. I've shared my story. It's all over the internet. I'm proud of the work that I have done to get where I am. Some other folks may not have the same experience. Maybe they just don't have the confidence, or maybe they don't have the ability to tell the story. Maybe there are people who they deeply care about that they don't want to include in their story, parents or a spouse or something, or children in public school that they feel like they can't do that. This would be individual to everyone's district. The one thing that is universal that I would say is it will take some strategy. It will take talking to some people. It will take learning what your district is like. It will take taking seriously what kind of impact this is going to have in the office in which you're running for.
That sounds like a very lawyerly "it depends" answer. That sounds like to me.
Well,
surprise!
and Gayle, it also reminds me of, talking about getting to know your particular district. Another piece of advice that I've heard you give in the past is to encourage people who are thinking about running for office to start at the ground level. So looking at school boards, municipal boards, things like that, right? Is that something you still believe in, even though you didn't follow that yourself? You jumped right into the state Senate level, right?
Absolutely. I think that is a very good piece of advice. Not only starting at the local level for office, but starting on the edges of a campaign rather than right at the top. If you want to be part of a campaign, that's helpful to learn the language and learn the procedure and see how it all works. That's helpful. In my particular case, as I said, my 5-county district, I do endurance competition events, Ironman, that kind of thing. And I have ridden miles and miles and miles on my bicycle. And because I'm in a rural area, I've been all over my district. And people knew me. Part of the joy of training like that is stopping at the little diners and the little public squares and getting to know people and stopping at the coffee shop when you're out doing a 70-mile bike ride. You know, it's nice to have a little break. People knew me from the bicycle. My paper had run a couple of stories on my doing the races. And so that helps. Having a bond and having a relationship with whatever the district is that you're going to run in, whether that's a local school district or whether it's a state senate district or a house district or whatever it is, having established a relationship ahead of time is always helpful because you've identified yourself before you ever begin to ask people for their vote.
Now, Gayle, we're running a little short on time, and I really want to get to audience questions, of which we've got 5 or 6 already, it looks like. But real quick, can you tell us what you're doing now? You know, I mean, you said you're doing some triathlons, but tell us about your work right now.
Sure. So I'm doing the usual lawyer work. I have a mediation practice and do a little bit of estate planning and the lawyer stuff. But the thing I'm more excited about doing is I serve as the executive director of Recovering from Religion, which is what a surprise from someone who came out of religion, that I recognize that sometimes religion can have lasting effects and the process away from religion can be somewhat long and arduous. Recovering from Religion exists to provide hope, healing, and support for people that are struggling with doubt and non-belief. That informs all of our projects. We have a 24-hour telephone hotline, 1-84-I-DOUBT-IT. We have a 24-hour internet chat. We have an online community. We have local support groups. Recoveringfromreligion.org is the website. I would encourage everybody, wherever along the spectrum you may fall, to give us a look at our website and see the programs that we're involved in. We're always looking for volunteers. And so if you've got a moment, visit the website, recoveringfromreligion.org.
Awesome.
Okay.
RFR. And between the two groups, we've got pretty much all the F's and R's locked up.
Okay, so we've got quite a few questions here. So here, Justin Scott, who is an activist in Iowa. If you've ever seen a news story about an atheist asking a politician in Iowa a question at a town hall, it's usually Justin Scott. He says, "This is such a great discussion. This needs to be a must-watch on the county level of every political party. Imagine what parties that lead to more non-religious folks stepping up to... Imagine watch parties, excuse me, Justin, that lead to more non-religious folks stepping up to run for public office."
Yeah.
I mean, I really would encourage anybody watching this to do that. You know, I think I told this story last time, probably the most rewarding part of the Founding Myth book tour that I had was when somebody came up to me after the talk, after the Q&A session, said, you know, listening to you, I'm going to run for school board. And a week later, I got an email and she sent me her website for her campaign. And to me, that was kind of the best moment. I really would encourage everybody to get out there. And to me, I think what the biggest hurdle is, and Gayle, maybe you want to speak to this too, is people look at what a qualified candidate would be and say, well, that's not me. I don't know anything about this. And my response to that is just, look at who is in public office right now. Like, of course you are qualified. Anybody watching this is qualified to run for something, and they should.
Absolutely, especially when you're in that, you are a resident of the community, you're a citizen in your community. The school board affects you, the road board affects you, the water board affects you. You are completely qualified to run. The religious piece is an aside. I do want to give a little shout out to Justin. Justin does the yeoman's work with making himself visible. I talked about the importance of visibility so that people can see that, yes, there are atheists among us. And Justin does that. He kind of dogs all of the candidates and he asks them about how they're going to react with atheist voters and what they're going to do with atheist voters. And so he has made himself vulnerable and visible. And so shout out to Justin for the hard work that he has done.
Yeah.
Now, everybody, this is your periodic reminder that FFRF is nonpartisan. We don't take stances in elections. And we have talked a lot about partisan politics, though, and we have a question from Dan Barker, whose name should be familiar to most. Aren't there also atheists in the Republican Party? Who wants to?
You guys can probably speak to that better than I can. I assume there are.
Yeah, I think
I haven't had a lot of encounter with them, but I'll turn that back over to you.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on it is, if you look at demographics, of course there are. There are certainly many atheists in the Republican Party, but you can imagine that given the contours of the party, at least recently, I could understand that it's a very difficult thing to for them to come out of the closet as an atheist. If you're in the Republican Party, you are needing to win over voting blocks like evangelicals, and so that's potentially very tricky.
The Christian nationalism has made it, I think, harder to be at least an atheist running for public office in the Republican Party, but atheists are everywhere. I think that's one of the big things that FFRF tries to show. We are everywhere. We're in your community. We are your doctors, your nurses, your teachers, your police officers, your firefighters. We are your elected officials. We get complaints here at FFRF from elected officials all the time. And they write through our complaint form and say, hey, this is going on at my city council. I'm the mayor. I need political cover. Can you write a letter from FFRF opposing this thing so that I can blame you when we all vote against it? I mean, we are everywhere, including the Republican
and I think
Party.
the important point to make is the most important point to make, and Andrew, you did it so well in your book, is you don't have to be an atheist to understand and appreciate and acknowledge the importance of the separation of church and state. You can be a religious person and feel strongly about it, and whatever your beliefs are, and understand that government and religion do not mix. That's not. Neither one is healthy whenever they mix, but certainly our government is not healthy whenever church and state cross over. And so that's the other piece of it. Not only are there atheists everywhere, and obviously they're going to be in all parties, but you don't have to be an atheist to understand. You can be a religious person and comprehend and embrace separation of church and state.
Absolutely. I mean, and to me, that's a crucial point. I mean, separation of state and church protects religious freedom as much as it does our right to a secular government. There is no freedom of religion without a government that is free from religion.
Yeah, we do a lot of collaborative work with interfaith groups that are composed of churches and synagogues and other groups that are religious communities that understand that everybody is better served if we stand up for separation of state and church.
All right, we've got a few more questions, Gayle. So Tommy Atkins asks, did you ever get any death threats after running for office?
I got a lot of ugly emails. I may have gotten some that crossed the line, none that we took terribly seriously, but it was just ugliness. It was just name calling and character assassination, all that ugly stuff. And we got a few that sort of crossed the lines that people are they're afraid, and so they're trying to make you feel, I don't know, trying to kind of analyze this armchair analysis about why they might be doing something like that. We turn them over, to our local law enforcement folks, and it was the law enforcement that told us that they didn't think that any of those were serious, but certainly got the old crank mail.
Were they related to, because I mean that stuff happens to every politician and person running for public office. So were they specifically related to your godless heathen ways, or were they just general?
100% related. It wasn't that I was a Democrat. I mean, yes, we are fractured in the state over those things, and yes, they don't have an understanding of why we would want to have health care for working poor who don't have it. It was no. It was not about that. Every bit of it was about the religious piece, about burning in hell and facing your master, your God, whatever they would say after you die, and that kind of thing. It was very related to the religion.
Well, we got one final question here from Cassie Marie. What was the biggest challenge that you faced as an atheist running for office?
There were moments when, because I was in a rural district, that my best friend served as my campaign manager, a dear friend, and she and I we'd travel the county, and we would find ourselves in the basement of a church or a building where we were going to speak with a group, and it was very rural and very religious, and we had no allies. This was not our group. We might have one or two people, and these, even though we didn't do a persuasion campaign, you kind of have to make appearances at these places. Our opponent's going to be there. Maybe this is a Farm Bureau meeting. Maybe it's a county extension meeting, and you wouldn't have an ally in the room. And to stand up there and to hear your opponent say his part, and then to have to get up and defend yourself and defend the principles upon which you were running, it's intimidating. I don't know that I would consider that the worst part. It was one of the most challenging. You have to be prepared for it. You have to know that it's coming. You have to know how you're going to respond. We never were fearful for our safety or anything like that. But it's when you're in a room full of people who you have this sensation of how they feel about you and what they think about you and what they believe about you. And to stand up and to go against that is a challenge. And it's a challenge that if you are prepared for, it's much more manageable.
Well, Gayle, thank you so much for joining us today. Judging by your bookshelf, your taste in literature is exquisite.
I knew you'd notice that.
we really do appreciate you taking the time to chat with everybody about this and encourage everybody to run for public office if they're able. Thank you so much for joining us on Ask an Atheist. Though we are out of time. If we didn't get to your questions, please tune in again next week. We're happy to answer more. We're gonna keep on with this conversation, I think, for a few weeks. We're gonna try to get some other speakers on about this. So that's it for us today. As always, visit our website, ffrf.org, for all sorts of information on our activities and to join us in fighting to keep state and church separate. We would love to have you as a member.
And this actually wraps it up for us for 2019. So as you might be,
join us next year.
Yes, next year. As you might be aware, the next 2 Wednesdays are federal holidays, so we'll be taking those off along with the rest of the country. So thank you again for watching, and we'll be back in 2020 with more of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.
Hi, everybody.